This is CheloniaCast, episode 54. Today we are joined by, this is a really special one, actually. We're joined by Peter Warny, who worked with the Nature Conservancy and National Audubon Society for many years, working on different ecological projects. And he's also got a lot of experience with turtles and tortoises. And that's what we're here for today, to focus on that work. We're also joined by Chase Pirtle, who's the animal care specialist and habitat manager at the Ashton Biological Preserve. We're actually, Jack, Chase, and Peter are all live joining us today. We're going to talk a lot about Florida ecology, turtle ecology. Really excited to have them. Thanks, guys.
Oh, 100%. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
So I guess I'll just direct this question at the room, but what got you both interested in turtles or tortoises or into nature in general?
You can run with it, Peter.
Well, a number of things. When I was a kid, if I was misbehaving or something, my mother would say, "Oh, go outside for a while," and I'd go outside and catch all kinds of reptiles and amphibians and other things. And then that led to my joining different nature clubs, in the Boy Scouts, and also herpetological societies, and particularly the New York Turtle and Tortoise Society. When I grew up in New York, and then eventually I ended up giving several talks at the New York Turtle and Tortoise Society in Manhattan. And one of them was in 2014 when I gave a talk entitled Road Trip for Turtles. And that's when I met Dr. Tony Monahan, who is currently writing a book called The Turtle Lover's Guidebook. So Tony and I became good friends. He also lives in New York area. And so his book is about captive populations of turtles in zoos and aquariums all around the country. And I love traveling and road trips. That's why I'm down here today. We gave Jack the tour. And I'm kind of a traveling itinerant field ecologist. And that led to many different experiences with reptiles, particularly turtles and tortoises. And then I met Chase along the road too.
How about you, Chase? How did you first get into turtles, interested in turtles?
Well, I rolled out of the womb. Yeah, I've been in the, just nature in general ever since I was little, as far back as I can remember. Snakes, tortoises, turtles, they were more accessible than birds and mammals, easier to catch, I guess. So I had more experience with them when I was little. And I decided to go this route just simply, there was a need for it. There's a need for all, conservation on many different levels, many different species, but reptiles needed the support. They kind of were underrepresented, misunderstood, had a lot of myths surrounding them. So I decided to go this route, simply because they were in need.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, it definitely sort of underappreciated in a lot of ways, and turtles can use all the attention they can get. But so you guys are joining us from Ashton Biological Preserve today, which is really awesome. It's a field podcast, which it's always a challenge to set these kind of things up. So it's just really cool that we can do this.
Yeah.
But maybe we can just get into sort of what is kind of the history of the Ashton Biological Preserve? Who are some of the key players in the formation of this preserve? And why is it important in terms of Florida ecology and for turtles in particular?
Ray and Pat Ashton started it up in 1996. Ray passed away in 2010 of pancreatic cancer, and then Pat was still teaching for a couple of years afterwards. She was pretty much, not really involved with the preserve too much. She's doing her own thing, but we still had a couple of tortoises here. We still have our conservation easement where we have to keep up with prescribed fire and habitat maintenance. So when I jumped on board, we kind of got the ball rolling, and that was 2013, and so it was, Ray, this was kind of Ray's baby, so Ray was the founder and Pat assisted along the way. But, and then afterwards, I kind of took the reins. and have been going since 2013. That was almost 11 years ago. And the importance from many different angles. We're working with private landowners around us, doing restoration work, getting their land protected with conservation easements, and assisting with that. It's not like we're signing the paperwork, we're doing the restoration work, we're putting the connections where they need to be, and the people in touch with each other. And then whether it be DOT mitigation money to conservation easements, or donating, selling, to state or a conservation entity. But so far, I think we're up to like 1,600 acres protected around the preserve, with networking with the landowners. So simply the future sustainability of the ecology in this area. And then we do outreach in the community, Gainesville, surrounding counties. And, we've reached in the past, like 10 years, over 140,000 individuals. And, that education ripples to other folks. And so, from that aspect alone, is extremely important as well, just as much as the networking with private landowners and getting the land protected. When I came to the preserve, I didn't, there's organizations doing great education in the community, but there was a high demand for it. Once I started running, going to schools or festivals or, power companies, the phone just started ringing and it didn't stop. And so with that high demand and seeing people out there doing it, but not a huge chunk of individuals doing it, especially in the private trade, there's a lot of hurt people in Florida, but, not many take the reins to, go to the schools, go that extra mile and, give back to the animals. A lot do, 100%, not discrediting anybody or calling out anybody individually, but there's a huge demand for education, and we're at a critical point in Florida where if change does not occur, in my opinion, the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have a serious decline with a lot of species extinction, and get us to a more critical point than we're already at. Sorry if I rambled for a minute.
No, exactly what I was looking for. That was great.
I just wanted to add, I first met Ray Ashton at an American Society of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists conference meeting in Boone, North Carolina, around 1998. And then I started to become friends with him. And the next year, in 1999, I purchased 80 acres, which is just on the other side of this building, for conservation. And Ray was doing some, at that time, really breakthrough projects of doing prescribed burns and then putting hay bales like around 20 acres to make artificial paddocks. And they were a recipient site for gopher tortoises. And Ray started doing research on underground communication of low frequency vibrations, how gopher tortoises can communicate with each other hundreds of meters away underground, where they dig their burrows down to the water table and sound travels faster in water than it does in air. So he was studying these low frequency communications, just like elephants do it and whales do it in the ocean. And a lot of other animals, even freshwater turtles, communicate acoustically now. So he started telling me about these acoustic studies. And he was also involved at that time, was a big outbreak of the upper respiratory tract infections in gopher tortoises, which since turned out to be like most infections. It comes on big and strong in the beginning. Even COVID did, killed. Then eventually our immune system acquires some kind of herd immunity, and it becomes not quite as lethal and deadly. But new strains keep popping up all the time. So he was studying upper respiratory tract infection and collaborating with Dr. Elliot Jacobson and other people at the University of Florida. And Ray was also working on these acoustic communications of gopher tortoises. And I thought, man, this guy is really cool. He's doing a lot of good things. So that's the history of the Ashton Preserve as I know it. And I've been coming here at least once or twice a year, every year since, even though unfortunately Ray passed away in 2010, as Chase mentioned.
Peter, what brought you to Florida? Because you mentioned you'd purchased a 80-acre parcel that's part of this sort of greater network of preserves around Ashton that Chase has mentioned. What brought you here? What was it about this Florida?
Well, to make a long story short, when I was at Stockton State College in New Jersey with my buddy Kurt Buhlman, who's now Dr. Kurt Buhlman at the Savannah River Ecology Lab, and we used to go out catching turtles in the cranberry bogs and swamps and rivers and coming back late all muddy and cut up. And we both knew that we kind of wanted to be herpetologists. I mean, Kurt really went into the great professional route at the Savannah River Ecology Lab, run by the University of Georgia with Wick Gibbons and others. One of the first times I came to Florida was on a spring break vacation. But while all my friends wanted to go out partying and drinking and hanging out with girls and partying, I was out at night with flashlights looking at lizards and snakes and trying to find turtles during the day. So I'd end up going to bed early, getting up early in the morning and catching and observing as much animal behavior of reptiles and turtles as possible. And that's why I've been coming to Florida every year since then. But I don't party much. I go to bed early and wake up early just to look at turtles every day.
Yeah, that's how it is for a lot of us. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
I figured that.
Yeah.
You could relate.
Well, something about just the topography and the habitat of Ashton, maybe we could just talk about that a little. I know it lies along the Brooksville Ridge, which is kind of a unique sort of topography, and there's a lot of unique sandhill and sort of mesic habitats. And maybe beyond the tortoises, we'll get into the tortoise work and research has been done there. But what other kinds of animals and unique species are you finding at the preserve?
You're typical. There's a lot of bobcat, deer. The raccoons, opossums. Your typical species. We have some wild quail still running around, which is great. That's about 97% decline within the bob white within Florida. Over I think the past 50, 60 years, if I'm correct. I have to look at that again. And then we have all sandhill, and then we have some wetlands as well. A couple aquatic systems, and then. The diversity is incredible. I've got my hands on 22 snake species since on this 100 acres. Once again, historically, we've co-managed around, close to 1,800 acres around the preserve with networking with the landowners and, tearing down fence line. And that list goes on and on. But so it's just, diversity is incredible. The insect diversity, when the entomologists come out and they set up their lights with the sheets. And I mean, it gets so thick, you can't even talk to the person next to you because the insects are going in and out of your mouth. And, the first time they set up those lights, it was, kind of put it in the full picture, just how diverse it is out here, insects obviously take the cake for diversity and, across the board, but it was like, whoa. And it won my heart. This was supposed to be originally kind of a stepping stone on my resume to, just get a position within the other animal realm. I wanted to go back out west. I love the mountains, but this fell in my lap, and it's not really where I want to be, but where can I do the best? And this was a great base to work from. And then, seeing the intact functionality and, earlier we were speaking and I was saying, when you go through Ashton Gates, like going towards Gainesville, you literally can go all the way to Gainesville and you don't have that endemic growth until you kind of reach the ridge right here. So it was not my first time experiencing it, but being engulfed in it, I guess. And it was just, it's still my heart. And I was like, this is awesome and a great place to set up shop.
Yeah, I love it up here. I mean, today we found one of the keepers found a hognose snake just crawling on the side of the road. And 2 days ago, we found a corn snake in one of the tortoise paddocks near the compost pile.
Coach whip yesterday.
Saw a coach whip yesterday. One of the first indigo snakes I've ever seen in the wild was with Ray Ashton when he was doing the feeding the tortoises after work in the evening. And I've seen also my first Florida pine snake with Ray. So there's a lot of wildlife here, including burrowing owls and sandhill cranes and swallowtail kites and lots of interesting plants and insects and arachnids. This is a very interesting place ecologically for particularly for terrestrial upland species like gopher tortoises and pocket gophers and lots of gopher frogs at night. You go out in the day, you'll see gopher tortoises. You go out at night and you'll see gopher frogs. A lot of interesting animals here and plants.
That's awesome. Maybe we can sort of get into talking about the some of the research and the characteristics of the gopher tortoise population that are actually at Ashton, which is cool. What are some of the unique things about the gopher tortoise population at the Ashton Biological Preserve, and what kind of research has been done on them? Maybe more interesting projects that you both have been involved with that stand out.
Yeah, so I guess the unique thing would be is that the Ashton Preserve, as well as some of the neighbors' property, including Peter's parcel, they're recipient sites for gopher tortoises. So, these were, as far as I know, some of the first recipient sites in the state, kind of, because the Ashtons wrote the curriculum originally for the relocation of the gopher tortoise and the whole 9 yards there. So I would think the genetic diversity would be really good, bringing some in with the population that was already established here. We have a fantastic population. We have like 507 that we have marked in a notebook that, during race time to current have been, captured, marked with Kegel method. And then, as the volunteers are driving in and have to move them out of the road, they'll take pictures and, we'll update the notebook and everything else. And so that's, one of the research aspects of the preserve. Also through camera traps, game cameras, we place them by the burrows and record the wildlife usage, which has been absolutely incredible. I mean, when I see a gopher tortoise, I'm like, oh, that's neat. When I see a gopher tortoise burrow, I'm like, that's awesome, because it just, it's explained earlier, like it's like you just entered a Pokemon realm where you can find, a multitude of species, and that it's just like, I always call the gopher tortoise like a poster child for your keystone species. Without those burrows, we would not even come close to having the functionality or the species diversity that we have.
Yeah, and some of the long-term, one thing I've learned from Ray Ashton was always go long. Think of long-term into the future. Chase has set up a lot of trail cameras. Some are focused on the entrance of gopher tortoises, which you can see flinging dirt. We saw one flinging dirt out of the burrow today. And at night, you see the gopher frogs hopping around the burrows and other animals. Another good ecological management technique they do here is burning different habitats and small pictures of the puzzle, like small pieces of the puzzle, 20 acres here, 20 acres here, 20 acres there, and give animals a chance to escape or hide from the fire. And when you got to burn on certain days so the fire's not moving too fast or too slow. And when a fire is coming through the habitat, a lot of animals go down the gopher tortoise burrows. Snakes, mice, Florida mice, other mammals, armadillos, everything seeks refuge underground. Then when the fire is over, which is usually pretty quick, then they all come back out. And Chase has done a really good job of putting out these camera traps. And he's seen all kinds of things like bobcats and bald eagles and a lot of coyotes and skunks and raccoons at night on the camera traps. While I'm sleeping, Chase is recording all these animals. So starting with Ray's work, 30 years ago, you go long-term projects, manage the habitat with a different burning regime in the hammocks and the lawn leaf and different kinds of habitats. Ray did a lot of work with burrow cams, putting the cameras down into the burrows down about 20 feet. And Chase is doing it now at the surface with the trail cameras, which records a lot of interesting photographs as well. Wild pigs, which come through here occasionally, as well as other nocturnal animals.
This is where Ashton was the site where David Attenborough, there's a pretty well-known clip on YouTube where they put the burrow cam in the actual tortoise burrow. Is that where that occurred? And does anyone know how did that come to be?
I don't know how the original connection happened, but yeah, he was here with the BBC crew in 2004 when they were filming Life in Cold Blood, and the 5th episode, Armored Giants. A good chunk of that was filmed here on site, and we still have the box turtle that he utilized. We named him Sir David, and so I don't know how the original connection came to be, but we have the book signed in the lab that we got framed, and it was neat. I mean, David Attenborough's been more places than probably any living organism on the planet. So I don't know, how he was in the room or on this land, but it's neat. He's obviously in the natural world. The voice of reason. He's just, you can't be anybody that's close to natural world conservation, about Attenborough, just like Goodall, Irwin, the list goes on, so it's really neat that, we had somebody, up the totem pole like Attenborough on site filming, and it's that history gives character. So it's neat that, that happened, and it gave the preserve, in a sense, a character aspect that it has.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a good point, though. It seems like he has been everywhere. I was in Costa Rica, and there's a room in one of the lodges we stayed at that they put a plaque on it that said it was his room, and no one was allowed in it. It was just David Attenborough's room that he stayed at a decade plus ago.
That's
so
awesome. That's
yeah, but he's been everywhere. But yeah, it's still cool that he came and sort of spread the word there. You mentioned the something that's interesting to me. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's when I took my first tour here, that rang loud when I heard about Attenborough being here. It was one of the attractions. It was neat. Just like they had the plaque with the room. It had that symbolic aspect to it.
Right.
This is Sir David.
Awesome.
And this is Little David.
Yeah, Little Dave.
And I went to see David Attenborough give a talk once at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City.
20 years ago, that was.
Yeah. Which was
Florida box.
Pardon me?
Yes.
Yep.
It's a little blur. Yeah, I see him. Cool.
They're intergrades this far north in the peninsula. They look more like Floridas as you get farther south Florida and the peninsula. But these are kind of intergrades between the Florida box and the eastern box.
And we've never got actually a wild box turtle out here. It's just gophers, but it is too dry. But from Ray's time to current, we've never recorded a box turtle.
But they're in Gainesville and surrounding counties.
Yeah, down on the lowlands.
Yeah, lower elevation. It's too hot and dry here.
We're Florida mountain men.
Yeah.
I like that term.
Yeah.
Jack. Yeah. Jack, have you searched for box
David Attenborough was always a big inspiration to me, and so was E.O. Wilson, who I happened to meet at a BioBlitz in Central Park in New York City about 15 years ago. And both E.O. Wilson and David Attenborough and Peter Pritchard and all those people have been a big inspiration. They were mavericks and great innovators in conservation. Of course, the world has changed a lot since they've all passed, and the world keeps changing, and conservation is going to be more challenging for younger generations in the future. But human innovation I'm very optimistic that we'll find new ways to deal with all these complicated ecological issues in the future.
Where do you think conservation is headed? How do you think that we keep a good trajectory if we're even on one in terms of protecting species and habitats?
The mass extinction is here. We're not talking about it anymore. It's there you go. Yeah, I don't know. It could be up in the air. It's up in the air. I have hope 100%, but as Peter said, every day it gets more complicated. I think the last report that I read said that we lack about 800 billion a year in terms of worldwide conservation. And like I was recently at the neighbor's house, one of the only neighbors that has a connection to TV. And we were watching the three main issues with society that society is concerned about. And it was the economy, crime, and abortion. And I was baffled. How did the natural world not make that list? That is the system that sustains our way of life. And with the state that it's in now globally, just not, in individualized areas or anything, I would think that would be number one. No matter what culture you come from, realm you come from, political party you're attached to, none of that matters down the road if we do not save the natural world, And so I think that kind of like a Berlin Wall scenario has to happen. When that wall came down, it happened so quick the governments couldn't really even react to it, and we need a movement for conservation to occur where it happens. People start, it becomes the norm for families to do trash pickups instead of play Monopoly. And not saying not play Monopoly, but when growing up, I never did trash pickups as a family. We went in the woods and camped occasionally, but there was never any give back too much. And I think that if it became the family norm or societal norm to give back, and that would make a huge difference down the road. It's unfortunate, but I do believe we're going to lose a lot more species before we reach that medium. But I think that getting it within the daily life and the routine and normalizing, nature back into our world and life is what's significantly needed.
In my travels around the country, I've been seeing a lot of private landowners that are interested in conservation. And there are advantages, disadvantages dealing with private landowners such as own hunting preserves and ranches and fishing camps and properties that can be managed better for ecological diversity of all common and rare species. One of the things I'm working on in Louisiana is the Atelier de la Nature, which in French means like a studio or art studio of nature. And it's blending art. It was founded by artists who are interested in nature art or eco art, as they call it, bio art, nature art, eco art, science, and food, which is culture. In St. Martin Parish in Louisiana, it's in the Chefalaya Basin in Cajun country, where people still go hunting alligators and catfish, and they go a lot of fishing and a lot of hunting to supplement a lot of their diet, and they have a lot of farming and growing crops to eat. So the culture there is living off the land, but they respect the land and want to keep diversity going. So this Atelier de la Nature in St. Martin Parish, which is just east of Lafayette, Louisiana, where the University of Louisiana is a very interesting area. A lot of highly well-educated scientists, a lot of artists. So I think in the future, you have to preserve nature through art, science, research, and culture. As I said, the culture in Louisiana is more in tune to living off the land. And nobody's super rich, but nobody's super poor either. And they all speak, have a combination of languages, and they're all a blend of English and French and Spanish and African American and Native American, Indian. All the DNA is mixed together, like the Creole culture, which is like a genetic gumbo of everybody's equal, everyone's mixed together. How can we all live off the land and enjoy all the plants and animals that we need to survive? And I personally am involved with landowners on this private memorial conservation fund in the name of my late son, Peter Henry Warny. So what was left of his college education fund and other investments I made, I am now trying to fund towards target towards specific conservation projects. He loved fish, turtles, and my wife loves plants and palm trees. So everything is connected, the plants, the animals, the fish, and everything. So now that I'm retired, I'm trying to, I'm 71 years old, and I see how the world is changing. We have to adapt, just like the animals and everything else has to adapt. And I'm trying to be involved in conservation with good people doing good things for conservation. That's my mantra for the day.
You're talking about integrating like conservation and nature into our culture and society as a way to get everybody involved. Like,
yes. And it's going to be more challenging in the future.
It's interesting. Again, going back to Costa Rica, it was interesting. I spent 3 months there, and a lot of the economy there is based on ecotourism and their natural resources. It's a very different. I mean, there's a lot fewer people. It's sort of more dispersed, not as high density of people, but they're very integrated with their environment there. And if you could apply that to some extent to the U.S. more than it is, maybe you could help kind of change a little bit in some areas, like you're saying, in Louisiana and having that connection with the land and the ecosystem, even if it's for a sort of subsistence or utilization perspective, you still have to understand it, and it's integrated in how you live. And so it can lead to preservation and just a more respect for it. I feel like a lot of people now are sort of just completely, the environment is just completely removed from how they function, on a day-to-day basis. It's really interesting.
Well, one of the projects I'm involved in, the funding part of it, is in Costa Rica, and it's on a PBS broadcast with Eric Callender, who I knew when he was a young kid and used to come to my talks at the Long Island Herpetological Society. Eric is making episodes for educational nature television, mostly for children. It's on the children's time slots, Saturday mornings. It's simply explaining and inspiring young kids to learn about nature and the complicated food webs and all the relationships of ecological conservation. Eric's doing a really good job. He does part of the time in the year in Madagascar and part of the time in the year in Costa Rica. It's on a PBS show, which should be, some of it's already aired. The Cape Cod episode where he went whale watching and radio tracking box turtles. I was in that episode for about 10 seconds. But young people like Eric, who's about half my age, is doing a lot of educational programs for kids all over the world. A lot of kids in Madagascar and in Costa Rica and all over the world.
That's awesome. So something kind of related to this topic that we're all curious about, we like to talk with people, is the role of ex situ conservation and assurance colonies, captive keeping. What do you guys think about captive keeping as a method of at least preservation to some extent?
Yeah, it's 100% needed. There's no question about that. A lot, the word conservation is overused a lot in the AZA realm, the captive realm, the state realm. So it's a matter of not just like, having a collection and, you can show, maybe the neighbor comes in one day and you show them, your turtle species, and you're like, okay, I just educated somebody, I'm good to go for the year, instead of, an appropriate medium, but yeah, look at, shout out to Orient Society, Georgia chapter, the Florida chapter, that's attached to Central Florida Zoo, breeding indigos. But, without that indigo colony, we're successfully putting snakes back in the wild. We wouldn't have that insurance. We wouldn't have that comfort. It would make life more stressful for the conservationist on, in the field, boots on the ground, and, supporters of the species as well. So yeah, captivity 100% across the board, from mammal to bird to herp. It's been successful in having insurance colonies, but it's just a matter of, doing it right and, tracking genetics. AZA with the stud book program, it's an incredible program that they started that tracks genetics. And I would love to see the private trade get a program that's similar to stud books that could be intertwined, or at least, commingled with AZA stud books. And that way, we can get more insurance for a lot of these species. And as Peter stated, the world's getting more complicated. Situations are worsening out there. So in my opinion, we need to get a lot of these captive insurance colonies up and running quicker than later. And also dispersing genetics as well. And, obviously, if you're in the animal realm, you usually don't have that much money. It's hard to get, multiple facilities or multiple locations, simply the networking that it has to take. But I think, when you look at, from the California condor to indigo snake, I think that, with Orient, that there needs to be multiple facilities that have, there's a tick. Very nice.
Yeah.
Welcome to Florida. Where was I? Oh, the insurance colonies and stuff. Yeah, but because for instance, let's say, your Florida Hurricane Alley, Cat 5 comes through, hits the facility, you can jeopardize. You don't want all your eggs in one basket. It's good to disperse genetics, and that way, at Ashton, I've done that as well with the radiated tortoises. I like to say at Ashton we do like 90. Let's say 90%, 95% endemic conservation, but we give either 5 to 10% of our energy efforts towards global conservation. By having those genetics, not all in one basket, you're furthering the security of that species as well. But once again, it comes back to society. Like for instance, I'm producing a documentary with Brent Fannin. He's the director of it, writer, producer. He's awesome. He just dropped a documentary called The Water State, I think about 8 months ago, on Florida Spring Systems, which was awesome. And it's called Gopher Games. It should be out soon. And it took us almost a year to raise the money to fund the documentary. By the time the first trip came, we didn't have the money to make that first trip happen. And that's when we started to have kind of be more promoted a little bit more and reach out to folks. And the documentary touches on some critical aspects of conservation. We're kind of digging a little deep where nobody's ever gone before. And during that process, it kind of showed me like, we as a herp community, bird community, we need to be more involved, network together. We need to support. And even if like an example being, I had a old volunteer that tossed $5 at the documentary and called me a week later apologizing. I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, right now you're financially not in a good position. I was like, and you donated. I was like, it's not that $5 donation meant more than somebody with a lot of money giving $1,000 donation. And, if all the herpers gave $5 at it, we wouldn't have had the struggles we had, just simply being able to raise enough to make it happen, And so, I got brain fart. What was the original question? My gosh.
You're going about insurance.
Insurance call. My gosh, rabbit hole.
No, that's great.
I think a lot of these facilities that are doing that, it comes down to they're limited while doing it because of the funding while currently doing it. So if state, private trade, corporate entities, religious entities, let's say, I've had the preserve almost 11 years I've been here. I've never had any religious entity reach out once to come toward the natural, which kind of baffled me behind the scenes a little bit, which I've never stated publicly, just because you would think that that'd be the natural world to some degree, get back and so I think it's a matter of these individuals, facilities that are ready to go. They just need the support to make things happen, and and get these insurance colonies set up, and also education too, because I've had herp buddies that haven't given back to conservation, but once they realize something or kind of stumble into the conservation realm, you see a change occurs, and either funding, donation, they're donating their time, to restoration work or education, and they've run down the rabbit hole. So I think a lot of it also comes down to educating the captive world on hey, this is the state of things and this is what needs to happen. I would like to see the amount of energy that goes into morphs go into endemics, or to just species in general across the board that that can actually save a species instead of just, almost like creating art, I guess, in a sense,
I think you bring up a great point about the conservation, that term being overused. And something that keeps me up at night is at the end of the day, all I want to do is secure a future for these animals that I love and that everybody should. But I think people need more of an avenue, what you're saying, to actually direct that. It's if I can do something that actually makes a difference, that's different than, okay, well, I educated somebody. What does that mean? Having more of a direct impact.
Yeah. And that's where state government also comes into play. Even our education system, when I was young, going through the school process, I maybe looked at the periodic table twice, it just wasn't in there. Yeah. So, it definitely comes back to that.
Yeah.
Regarding the insurance colony and captive propagation, which used to be a very controversial topic, not always so popular. But now, as we're moving towards the future, we really have no choice but to work out the kinks in captive propagation and insurance colonies, because there are no natural pristine wilderness in nature anymore. We're heading towards an age of what I call anthropronatural conservation. Every ecosystem in the world and every species has the handprint of our species, Homo sapiens, on it, because the natural world keeps getting smaller and smaller, and the human population is increasing exponentially every day by billions and billions of people, more people in the future. They say every environmental issue is caused by one thing: too many people and not enough land. So that's why the future is going to be isonatural populations and anthropronatural conservation, working with man and culture and people and families, as well as the plants and animals. So it's very needed to focus on research to develop better methods in head starting and propagating captive species, which used to be very controversial. But people like my old college friend Kurt Buellman is doing that with Fish and Wildlife and working on projects to head start and breed a lot of rare species up north, like wood turtles, Blanding's turtles, chicken turtles, and other species that are really declining in the wild because there's just so many people fishing and hunting and boating everywhere. Species that Kurt's working on are becoming declining in the wild, but he is doing excellent work in working out how to improve the future of captive husbandry, insurance colonies, and captive propagation to be released in the wild and limited certain preserves, like with Fish and Wildlife and National Wildlife refuges and other places. And it has to be on a case-by-case, meticulously researched and tested cases. Particularly, it seems to be working very well with Blandings, wood turtles, and chicken turtles, and box turtles and spotted turtles, and the list will keep getting longer.
Yeah, and that's like, for example, in Florida, with regulation, I can't breed the gopher tortoise. I can't breed box turtles. I can't breed terrapins. I can't breed pine snakes. And they're tying our hands, down the road as these species decline, especially in Florida. I mean, yeah, as Peter said, with population. And then you got to think, when you have a large population that doesn't have any connection to the natural world, that, it speeds it up a little bit. But with, those captive populations, you're also helping the species in the wild, because if you're limiting, U.S. Ark did this with the terrapin breeding program. They did a great job. They compared it to the drug trade. You are not going to eliminate it. How do you limit it the best that we can? And on top of the captive insurance colonies, what that is doing is it's limiting the amount of people going in the field taking the wildlife. And one thing that I think that's overlooked a little bit is sanitizing tools in between habitat types. In Florida, we have diseases running rampant right now. With the Burmese python brought over, I believe that it's wreaking havoc on the snake populations in Florida right now. And how many of these diseases have been spread from poacher to biologists that don't know that they're not, soaking their dip nets in between sites, cleaning snake hooks in between sites, sanitizing shoes in between sites. And so I think not just for the species themselves, but the actual ecology and sustainability of that ecology within that area, captive breeding programs can significantly help with that as well.
That's a really interesting point. I want to jump back to something that you've mentioned a few times, Chase, just the gopher tortoises and sort of conservation and the relocation programs, but just maybe in general, there's such an interesting species of tortoise in the sense that they seem to be very dense, and there's a lot of them now, but the habitat that they're in is being cleared so rapidly that there's almost a concern there of trying to keep common species common. And is that even the right way to look at this? What do you think
Yes.
about the conservation status of Gopher Tortoise?
I think that it's really bad right now, and you're right. In certain areas, I'm not going to say riddle, but there's a good chunk of them. But it comes down to fragmentation. Florida's kind of becoming a safari park. Oh, you got to go to Cypress to see the panther. You got to go to Ocala to see the bear. You got to go to the Brooksville Ridge to see the tortoise. And so without that connectivity, corridor systems, genetic dispersal, and especially in North Florida, when around the 80s, you had a lot of land clearing for development, agriculture. I call him, or my buddy, shout out to Matt. He deemed them the Walking Dead, and I've always kind of kept that in the back of my head. And these tortoises that survive the conversion, when they reproduce, how is any hatchling Gopher tortoise supposed to survive on 500 acres of pasture? A terrestrial predator, bird of prey is going to pick it up immediately, succumb to the weather elements. So a lot of these tortoises that survive the conversion are now dying off, and there's no new ones filling the niche. And what they did is allow safe travel, safe passage through these agricultural systems with refuge, eluding predators and weather elements. And without that, without that refuge, the other species, as in pine snake, indigo, eastern diamondbacks, mammals. I mean, they're all going to decline at a faster rate. So, I think the situation is really bad. And every generation gets used to less and less. And, when I talk to Peter and the other old heads, it's like, them finding no offense, Peter. Indigos, or, they, pull over on 95, 75, walk in a random set of woods and come out with an eastern diamondback and, large, eastern indigo, and not anymore. And that's a short amount of time in the grand scheme of things. So it's quickly changing. And my, decade at Ashton, there's a decline within the snakes. When there were 10 birds on the wire, now there's 5, and we're not seeing the slides to species diversity. And I think there's a lot of factors that come into play as well. So sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole again, I think.
Great. An example of what I think is some good conservation heading towards the new age of the future is my old friend, Dr. Michael W. Clemens in Connecticut, who just recently wrote a book about conservation of reptiles and amphibians in the state of Connecticut. Now, Connecticut's a very populated, small state close to New York City, between New York City and Boston, but there are natural areas where Michael lives in northwest Connecticut. There's still rattlesnakes there, and bog turtles and wood turtles. And that whole area between Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut is kind of like the wilderness of Connecticut. But Michael has figured out a lot of micromanaging and fine-tuning these small isolated populations, such as box turtles, on a small acreage site surrounded by highways and railroad tracks and industrial buildings. So how do you conserve small fragments of nature in the heavily populated Northeast of the United States? Michael Clemens is doing very good work, excellent research and data collection, and practical solutions to conservation problems in a very tough state to work, which is, as I said, pretty densely populated between New York and Boston, but there's still a lot of good conservation efforts going on in New England, thanks to Michael Clemens and others colleagues.
And back to the Gopher tortoises real fast, what it does for the state is, as it worsens, now Florida has to put $3 billion into conservation instead of 30 years ago, $1 billion, And so if you strategically focus on like the Gopher tortoise, which is a keystone species, you help so many other species. And, when you approach, within Florida as well, the commissioners for FWC, a lot of them are linked to development directly. And it's, until a change occurs there, it's, me, Peter, all the conservationists can work as hard as we, can go as hard as we're capable of going. But at the end of the day, if there's not change on that hierarchy and getting people in the right positions, we can only do so much. But for the states aspect, when we go to them, whether it's a venomous aspect, this kind of aspect is, usually it all comes down to, okay, how's this beneficial for the economy or financially? And the state can save a lot of money by strategically focusing on restoring populations of gopher tortoises, because you help so many other species with that. So like we were talking on earlier, if you protect the panther, you just protected thousands of acres, which is going to help so many other individual animals as well. So same scenario more or less.
When it comes to the gopher tortoise relocation, the relocations you've mentioned, I know there's a lot of debate about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the relocation program is good. It's better than entombing them or just displacing them. But you can't, like when Florida pretty much ran out of recipient sites for the gopher tortoise, what did they do? They rolled back those protections for the gopher tortoise. They nixed the 100-mile regulation. Now you could, for a time period, take them over 100 miles from where they originally came from. And you can't take a tortoise from South Florida into the panhandle and expect a successful transition. You're talking about an animal that's never experienced the hibernation to an animal that has, goes into almost full-blown hibernation. And when you think about it, like you can usually your typical, sandhill habitat can support 2 tortoises per acre. That's how bad it is, that we have to actually go over 100 miles to relocate an animal that can set up shop on an acre, And so the relocation program is good in itself. It's, a lot of these other states that have gopher tortoises don't necessarily have a relocation program like Florida does, but you can't, it's like musical chairs. You can't just keep relocating. You have to have strategy behind it. Are you relocating to corridor systems? Are you relocating, to have genetic diversity and not let the species get bottlenecked, which in the world today, a lot of species out there, once again from mammal to bird to herp, are were bottlenecked 100 years ago, or are not rebounded, but have stabilized to some degree, or not at least kept going down the decline in numbers.
Right. The concept of the genetics of the movement is interesting, because there's some level of introducing tortoises from different areas could be good to actually increase genetic diversity, but there could be some bad to that depending on the types of alleles you're introducing in that population.
100%. Yeah, indeed. And that's why, it's important to relocate within the realm that you took them from. And I think that's, important to do, is make sure that, we're protecting or have enough land, throughout Florida where we don't have to get in a pickle like we currently got in 2021, 2022 with the gopher tortoises, in terms of like, where do we put them, And then also, I think the recipient sites are getting up to $7,000 per tortoise, so it's a money game at the end of the day as well. And, a lot of these tortoises are going to recipient sites that, are managed by agricultural tycoons or developers themselves, and not necessarily conservation individuals or organizations. So it's not like the money from that relocation is actually getting funneled back in necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And with the, I think it was the incidental take permits, which they banned in 2007, but I believe I have to look again, 1991, 1993, 1991 to 2007, they entombed over 100,000 tortoises, and the state made $83 million off of those tortoises. And they only bought back, I think, 4% of the land, which was destroyed for the tortoises, with that 83 million.
Jeez.
God damn.
Yeah, that's scary figures. Hopefully, yeah, like you said, I mean, the political change aspect is an interesting area, because that'll make a lot of difference.
Yeah, and it's almost like we put energy into almost pretending that we do conservation instead of just doing conservation, as in, within the state aspect of it. And if we were serious about it, instead of putting a band-aid on a wound, as I like to call it, significant, accomplishments could be made. But as Peter stated earlier, it's every day it's getting worse. And it's important to, I think it's extremely important within the next 5 years, we get insurance colonies, proper protection, and also public awareness. If you talk to your average person in Florida, oh, the gophers are good, they're getting relocated, they have a program, they've saved the day. They can't tell you anything about the incidental take permits. They can't tell you anything about the agricultural loopholes or what's really going on in terms of the relocation aspect. And I think if the public knew, when you go to these FWC meetings, they're not, unless it's a certain topic that's really touching a button, which they've been doing a lot lately. There's nobody really at these meetings. And it's always kind of been a little bit, depressing to myself, is like, wow, these are, these regulations being created or things being spoken on are literally creating the future for Floridians. People are very distant from it.
Right. And there's some, the level of the potentially perceived as a common species is kind of a downside. You don't have the sort of sexy status of critically endangered, that sort of thing, and a lot of incentive to protect. But it's like you're saying, The Walking Dead, it's kind of a scary prospect.
Yeah. And it seems like we wait till a species gets to that status, critically endangered, before we act, instead of focusing on it before it hit that, level. And if we would have focused on it prior, we would have saved money as a society, as well as had better genetics, therefore limiting, the potential, funding energy that would have to go in that species down the road with protection, regulation, you name it.
Right. For a species that provides so many benefits to the ecosystem, it's a shame that it may get to the point where it's the typical, it's endangered, now we're going to act.
Perfect. Yeah. And for example, like we had ranavirus come through in 2018. We believe it got here by one of the neighbors stocking their ponds with fish, ranavirus or rotavirus. It means the ranavirus. And, I found 5 deceased or on the verge of deceased tortoises in the field. Got the tortoises tested, came back positive, told the state about it. No action whatsoever. If that was a deer or CWD or a turkey disease, bird, a disease that affects turkeys, a game species, they would be here like that. And being the keystone species, you would think that kind of action would be taken with their significance to the functionality of the ecosystems.
Right. Yeah. Well, hopefully, yeah. People listening to this are the future of a lot of this conservation work. So thinking about ways to make things like keystone species more of have a lot more sway, I guess, in a monetary way would be useful. Maybe we can start talking a little bit about some of the stuff that's just the adventures and those kind of things that both of you have been on. I know that you just in the course of doing field work, you come across cool things. I'm curious for both of you, what has been your most interesting or craziest field experience, maybe in pursuit of turtles?
I don't know if we're allowed to talk about those on here.
We can clean up some of them.
Yeah.
One thing I want to mention that is going on here, again, getting back to the trail cameras, is animal behavior. You can study the deal rhythms of turtles, what they do first thing in the morning, how they clean out their burrows and do housekeeping and push out all the leaves and fling sand. And they're doing basic burrow maintenance. And then they go out foraging and they make the same trails all the time. So the creatures of habit doing the same thing at the same time every day. They go for the morning stroll, munching on plants and wiregrass and cactus and other food items, and how they survive on a day-to-day basis. Getting back to stories and adventures, I'll just tell one story real quick. I was down one time catching mud turtles, small little mud turtles, and I was feeling around in this mud in a black water swamp. I couldn't see. It was like coffee-colored water. And I'm feeling around for more mud turtles. And my wife was there next to me saying, I don't think you should be feeling around like that. And I said, oh, it's okay. And I started feeling around in the mud. All of a sudden, I felt something that felt like a leather suitcase. And all of a sudden I jumped, and it was like a 6-foot alligator was buried there in the mud. So I lucked out that day, and I thanked my lucky stars. Is maybe I won't be as foolish and careless in the future. And my friend said, if someone had a video camera, you could be on America's Dumbest Videos.
That's great.
That's one of my.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, stepping on venomous snakes in the field to getting bum rushed by pigs. I mean, there's quite a few interesting stories. So, Florida man, so
Florida
man.
Florida.
So it's one thing I will state is, I have my venomous permit in the state, and I do a lot of like education training with the venomous in the venomous realm, and all my close calls have been in a wild aspect because I don't know where they are. In the captive setting, I know where they are, and I was doing a restoration project one time. I was behind a little bit, going through this area, trimming laurel oak like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There was no passiveness about it. And I went right over a 5-foot EDB Eastern Diamondback. And I mean, 2 inches away from my hand, foot away from my face, chose to run down a gopher burrow, not run, obviously no legs, but shoot down a gopher tortoise burrow instead of tag me. I mean, I had to be blasting with heat with the chainsaw going, me just sitting there sweat. I mean, I don't know why she didn't hit me. I would have hit me. And other times a salamander in the panhandle one time, brushed the cottonmouth and it turned its head and, inch away from my hand, showed mercy. So it's, if folks are watching this that, don't have a lot of, snake experience, or a lot of, your average public, they think venomous snake, automatically they think aggressive, aggressive entity, it's been really inspiring, having these close calls with these animals that have not gone the distance when they could have and should have.
Yeah, that's something. Well, yeah, and we can start to wrap things up, I think, and we're coming on a time here, but we got a few more quick questions we'd like to ask. I do want to talk about something that you sort of mentioned briefly, Peter, about sort of northern turtles and Blanding's turtles, wood turtles. What other kind of work have you done with those species, maybe through your work with Nature Conservancy and such?
Well, generally surveys of absence, presence, and population estimates back in the day. But that was the old, that was the cutting edge conservation back in the 80s. Now, 40 years later, as I said, things are a lot more complex. One of the best models I see in the crowded Northeast is the work that, I said, Michael Clemens is doing on conservation of box turtles and wood turtles and spotted turtles and other animals in Connecticut and nearby states. And there's other people doing good projects up in the north where there's less land, everything's more expensive. There's more people and less large tracts. Like down in Florida, you have large ranches of hundreds of acres. In Louisiana, you still have a lot of open space. A lot of it was crayfish ponds where they grow rice, and they cultivate a crop of rice. Then they cultivate a crop of crayfish. So they make money by selling crayfish to boil up and eat along with the rice. And there are big differences between the South and the North, obviously. But there are some good conservations in all those species you mentioned. Blandings, wood, spotted, box, terrapins, and other species. And some of the best work that I've personally been experienced and got to see is work being done by Kurt Buhlman and also Mike Clemens and many other people. Too many to mention. But there is some good work. There are good people doing good things everywhere. But it's never as simple and easy as it used to be.
Right. Yeah, it's cool to sort of hear your experience. I mean, traveling around, like you said, you sort of go around and do a lot of this field work with other people and get to see all their projects. So it's cool to hear about the projects that you think are sort of the ones that are making a big difference.
Well, I want to briefly mention a project I visited a few weeks ago with Chris Lekowitz and Michael Mills. They are doing excellent work in collecting data on radio tracking many species. There are sea turtles there, and they had some satellite transponders on those and terrapins. But what I saw was radio tracking chicken turtles, Florida box turtles, and Florida mud turtles. And they're planning on adding a fourth turtle species this summer when they get funding for the radios and equipment to add striped mud turtles, which is a species Jack is very interested in. So islands, I used to do a lot of traveling to islands with my friend James D. Lazelle, who also passed last year. He's done work all over the Florida Keys and in the Outer Banks of North Carolina and in Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard and a lot of islands up and down the East Coast. And the project I was at a few weeks ago, which I was very, very impressed with, they're doing bat surveys for bonnet-headed bats, and they have acoustic monitors on trees, and they're interested in the whole ecology. Unfortunately, when I saw his talk at the Turtle Survival Alliance conference that we went to in Charleston, Hurricane Ian really moved people's houses and boats all over the place. There were box turtles moved out in salt water and gopher tortoises floating around. But the hurricane itself, what probably killed more turtles was the cleanup afterwards, bulldozing everything and trying to cut down trees and bulldoze all the debris and hundreds of pounds of old trees. The aftermath of a hurricane causes as much damage to turtles as the hurricane did itself. Turtles can take being displaced and floating around in salt water for a couple days. As long as it rains, they can drink fresh water, at the surface, or they can drink fresh water later. Turtles can survive a hurricane, as they always have for thousands and thousands of years, but they don't survive bulldozers very well.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot, and especially the saltwater intrusion, that sort of thing too. That can be a huge issue, just long term.
Well, adult turtles can survive that, but they think that the age size class, the 2022 hatch year class of baby snakes and turtles all got wiped out because of the salt. But the adults, which are bigger and have more buffering mass, adult turtles and snakes can climb trees, and adult turtles can handle salt for a couple days or a week or two. But the baby hatchlings can't. So it wiped out that 2022 age size class, as far as I can estimate.
Yeah, that's another thing too with like hurricanes. Like this year's predicted to be the worst hurricane year ever with how warm the oceans are and leaving an El Nino, going into El Nino, and that's with the fragmentation in Florida. When these hurricanes hit these areas before and you lost some genetics, individuals always had surrounding populations to rebound that population, and now with the fragmentation, a lot of these areas that are getting hit with the hurricanes, you don't have the land doesn't have the access or opportunity to rebound those genetics like historically.
Right. I guess as we're wrapping up, for Peter, I've got one question too. You've been on so many turtle adventures. I'm curious what your most memorable turtle adventure has been.
Well, the adventures haven't ended yet, and I just want to end that saying, as I get older and see, what happens in the past, present, and future of turtle conservation, I am very optimistic about the saga continues with one generation's people such as yourself and Jack and all these good people are going to have to continue the adventure into the future. We're all going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Like any business or venture, there is always plenty of good, bad, and ugly. One of my favorite Clint Eastwood movies. There's good, bad, and ugly in everything. But always try to be optimistic and always keep your sense of humor and work hard towards doing the best you can with what you have into the future. into the future?
We'll definitely take that to heart.
Yeah, that pretty much covers our last question we like to ask. That's yeah, but thank you guys. It's been awesome.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
We at the end too. We like to. I don't know if you guys got a few minutes. We like to do a little turtle trivia. I don't know if you've got some random turtle facts you want to throw at us. See if we can answer them. We could throw one at you guys, whichever you want to do.
Okay, I got one.
Okay, all right.
Sure.
Turtle trivia.
Yeah.
Is it you want a question or
Yeah, just a question. Like ask, like it's more like a
Story.
question. Like ask us like a fact or something we know. I mean, a story could work.
Okay, we're entering a culture of non-binary, transgender, all this stuff. My question is, are there non-binary intersex turtles?
I guess I would say yes for that, Michael. Like
yeah.
After certain
It's
experiences.
been documented in Reed's turtles that yes, there are intersex turtles, and it happens in nature a lot.
Yep.
So anyway, I just thought
that's a good one.
Confuse everybody.
Yeah, we've had experiences with them actually. So
yeah.
But yeah, there's not a lot known about them. But yeah, for sea turtles, and there was a paper from 1941, I think, with a slider that had an ovotestis. So both
Connections good.
But
We're still good on this.
all right. Well, that's I think that's good. And if any of you have anything that you want to finish off with that we didn't cover, that kind of thing, I mean, but yeah, as long as everyone's good.
We'll think of it later, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you guys coming up here, and I hope you had a good experience. I know I did. I'm really glad we did this today. I know other people that would like to do this podcast, and I think you guys are doing a really good job, and I just wanted to shake your hand.
Appreciate that a lot.
If you were here, Michael, I'd shake your hand too. Thank you very much.
Virtual shake hands. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
well, thank you.
Peter said, keep doing what you guys are doing. It's good stuff. I scrolled down your YouTube page the other day, and you know you've had some renowned people on there and good conversations and stuff. So yeah, keep up the good work.
Yeah, I didn't see the one with Anthony Pirtle, but I've been to his house and I've met him at least twice, and he's a really fantastic person doing great work on captive husbandry of turtles. His species and his collection at his house is phenomenal, and he just built a greenhouse to expand.
Yep.
Home improvement,
awesome
greenhouse for turtles.
He's
Ray
an
Ashton
awesome guy.
here too. Well, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Peter and Chase. This was a really fun one, and we will see you guys. Have fun with the rest of the day. Bummed I couldn't be there. Yeah. All right.
Next time.
Let's go see what else we can find today.
Yeah.
Take care.